the Oklahoma City bombing tragedy. It was an ordinary day somewhere in the heart of Oklahoma City on April 19, 1995. The city bustled with life as people went about their routines, the sun casting a warm glow over the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. Little did anyone know that that morning would soon transform into a scene of unimaginable horror and devastation. The Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building stood proud and imposing, its facade a blend of concrete and glass that housed numerous government agencies. Nearby, the vibrant neighborhood hummed with activity, and its streets lined with shops, cafes, and office buildings. Parents dropped off their children at the daycare center housed within the federal building, a seemingly safe space for the youngest members of the community. As the clock ticked toward 9:02 a.m., calmness enveloped the area. People chatted, exchanged greetings, and carried on with their work. Inside the federal building, employees settled into their offices, unaware of the looming threat that was about to shatter their lives. Then, in an instant, an earth-shattering explosion occurred, ripping through the tranquility of the morning. The very foundations of the Murrah building trembled as if protesting the violence inflicted upon it. A blinding flash of light followed by an ear-splitting roar sent shockwaves through the city, shattering windows and tearing apart the very fabric of reality. The force of the blast instantly reduced the 9-story building to a twisted pile of debris, its windows blown out, its walls collapsing inwards. Panic spread like wildfire as the initial shock subsided, replaced by a chaotic scene of destruction and disbelief. Smoke billowed into the sky, obscuring the sun and casting a pall over the city. Dust and debris rained down on the streets below, covering everything in a gray shroud. First responders rushed to the scene, their faces etched with a mixture of determination and horror as they navigated the treacherous landscape of debris, searching for survivors amidst the devastation. Frantic parents arrived at the daycare center, their hearts pounding with dread as they realized the nightmare that had unfolded. The once vibrant playground now lay buried beneath the wreckage, a haunting testament to the innocence that had been forever shattered. The community, once united by shared spaces and a sense of security, now stood divided by the aftershocks of an act of unimaginable cruelty. As news of the explosion spread, the shockwaves reached far beyond Oklahoma City. Across the nation and around the world, people watched in disbelief as images of the destruction filled their television screens. In the wake of the explosion, a city that had known unity and peace was plunged into a state of grief and disbelief. The survivors grappled with both physical injuries and emotional scars. In the wake of the catastrophic explosion that rocked Oklahoma City, the city found itself plunged into a state of shock and disbelief. The once thriving neighborhood surrounding the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building now resembled a war zone, with rubble-strewn streets and shattered windows serving as haunting reminders of the violence that had occurred. First responders and emergency personnel worked tirelessly in the aftermath of the blast, their efforts driven by a potent mix of determination and compassion. Firefighters, police officers, and paramedics converged on the scene, their uniforms caked in dust and their faces etched with weariness. Together, they navigated the treacherous landscape of debris, carefully searching for survivors amidst the chaos. Amidst the devastation, stories of heroism emerged. Ordinary citizens, driven by an instinctual need to help, joined the rescue efforts. Strangers became allies, working side by side to pull survivors from the wreckage. The sound of sirens, the wailing of ambulances, and the shouted commands of first responders filled the air, creating a cacophony that underscored the urgency of the situation. As rescue operations continued, law enforcement officials swiftly launched an investigation into the origins of the explosion. The magnitude of the destruction and the loss of life left no room for hesitation. Federal agents from agencies such as the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, ATF, descended upon the scene, collaborating with local law enforcement to piece together the puzzle. One crucial piece of evidence quickly emerged: the remnants of a rental truck found near the blast site. This discovery led investigators down a path that would eventually uncover the chilling truth behind the attack. The truck, which had been rented by a man using a false name, carried with it a sinister message. Its cargo, a massive bomb crafted from a lethal combination of ammonium nitrate and fuel oil, had been deliberately detonated with the intent to cause maximum destruction. In the midst of the investigation, a name began to circulate: Timothy McVeigh. A former soldier and self-proclaimed patriot, McVeigh had become increasingly radicalized by anti-government ideologies. His anger and resentment toward perceived government overreach had driven him to commit an act of domestic terrorism that shocked the nation. As law enforcement honed in on McVeigh, his capture became a top priority. Within days of the bombing, he was apprehended and taken into custody. The nation watched as McVeigh was led away in handcuffs, his stoic demeanor contrasting sharply with the grief and anguish felt by the survivors and the families of the victims. The investigation continued to unveil a disturbing narrative. McVeigh's motivations, his connections to extremist groups, and the meticulous planning that had gone into executing the attack painted a chilling portrait of a man driven by a dangerous ideology. His arrest marked a turning point in the quest for justice, but it also raised critical questions about the rise of domestic terrorism and the potential for such acts to take root within society. As the days turned into weeks, the Oklahoma City community grappled with the enormity of their loss. Memorials and vigils sprang up, a testament to the resilience and solidarity that emerged from tragedy. The investigation would carry on, revealing the intricate web of individuals and ideologies that had played a role in the Oklahoma City bombing. Meanwhile, amidst the darkness, a glimmer of hope began to emerge: the determination to honor the memory of those lost and to ensure that such a senseless act of violence would never be forgotten. In the wake of Timothy McVeigh's arrest and the unfolding details of the investigation, the nation grappled with the unsettling truth behind the Oklahoma City bombing. As law enforcement delved deeper into McVeigh's background and motivations, a portrait of a troubled individual consumed by a toxic blend of anger, resentment, and anti-government sentiments emerged. Timothy James McVeigh had once been a young man with dreams of military service, drawn by a sense of duty and patriotism. But over time, his experiences would lead him down a dark path, ultimately culminating in an act of violence that would forever scar the nation's psyche. The seeds of McVeigh's radicalization were sown during his time in the U.S. Army. Stationed at Fort Riley, he witnessed firsthand the disastrous events at Ruby Ridge and the siege at the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas. These incidents, marked by violent confrontations between government agencies and armed groups, fueled McVeigh's growing distrust of authority and ignited a fervent belief in the necessity of armed resistance. Through extremist literature, online forums, and interactions with like-minded individuals, McVeigh's anger was stoked into a dangerous flame. He became deeply entrenched in the anti-government movement, adopting a toxic worldview that saw the federal government as an oppressive force that needed to be dismantled. As McVeigh's beliefs festered, so did his plan for an act of violence that he believed would ignite a revolution. The bombing of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building was not a random act of aggression. It was a meticulously calculated strike against what McVeigh saw as a symbol of government tyranny. His goal was to awaken a movement, to rally others to his cause through an act so shocking and devastating that it could not be ignored. The trial that followed McVeigh's arrest was a painful chapter in the nation's history, marked by heart-wrenching testimonies from survivors and families of the victims. As the evidence against McVeigh was presented, a chilling image emerged of a man who had coldly plotted the attack, his callous disregard for human life evident in his actions and statements. The prosecution painted McVeigh as a calculating terrorist who had shown no remorse for his heinous act. His defense, meanwhile, sought to humanize him by presenting his experiences in the military and his exposure to radical ideologies as factors that had contributed to his radicalization. Ultimately, McVeigh was found guilty and sentenced to death. His conviction marked a measure of justice for the victims and their families, but it also raised questions about the factors that had allowed such an ideology to take hold and fester within society. As the trial concluded, the echoes of the Oklahoma City bombing reverberated far beyond the courtroom. The tragedy served as a sobering reminder of the potential for violence fueled by extreme beliefs and the importance of addressing the root causes of radicalization. The scars left behind by McVeigh's act of terror would serve as a somber testament to the fragility of society and the need for vigilance against the rise of domestic extremism. In the aftermath of the Oklahoma City bombing, a shattered community faced the daunting task of picking up the pieces and finding a way to heal. The scars left by the devastating attack were not only physical but emotional, as survivors, families of the victims, and the nation at large grappled with the profound impact of the tragedy. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the city of Oklahoma began the arduous process of rebuilding. The once bustling neighborhood surrounding the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, once marked by destruction and chaos, slowly transformed into a symbol of resilience and hope. The process of recovery was marked by a deep sense of unity, as individuals from all walks of life came together to support one another and honor the memory of those lost. The Oklahoma City National Memorial emerged as a poignant tribute to the victims and a solemn reminder of the tragedy. The serene memorial featured 168 empty chairs, each one representing a life cut short by the blast. The reflecting pool that graced the site served as a mirror to the grief and loss that had touched so many lives. The haunting beauty of the memorial offered a space for reflection, remembrance, and healing, as visitors from across the nation paid their respects and left tokens of love and support. Survivors of the blast, some bearing physical scars and all bearing emotional wounds, found strength in their shared experiences. Support groups and counseling services offered a lifeline to those struggling to cope with the trauma. The bonds forged in the crucible of tragedy formed a tight-knit community that leaned on one another for comfort and understanding. The impact of the Oklahoma City bombing extended beyond the immediate survivors and the local community. The tragedy prompted a national conversation about domestic terrorism, extremism, and the factors that could drive individuals to commit acts of violence against their fellow citizens. It served as a wake-up call to the dangers posed by radical ideologies and the imperative of addressing the root causes of such extremism. The Oklahoma City bombing also led to changes in law enforcement practices and counterterrorism efforts. The lessons learned from the investigation and trial of Timothy McVeigh highlighted the need for improved communication and coordination among federal, state, and local agencies. The tragedy underscored the importance of vigilance and proactive measures to prevent future acts of domestic terrorism. In the years that followed, the Oklahoma City National Memorial became a focal point for remembrance and education. Its visitor center housed artifacts, photographs, and personal stories that offered a window into the lives of the victims and the resilience of the survivors. The memorial served as a platform for dialogue, encouraging conversations about the legacy of the tragedy and the steps that could be taken to prevent similar acts of violence. As the city of Oklahoma and the nation at large reflected on the Oklahoma City bombing, the memory of the lives lost served as a solemn reminder of the preciousness of life and the need to strive for a more inclusive and compassionate society. The process of healing was ongoing, marked by both the pain of loss and the strength of a community that refused to be defined by the darkness of a single act of terror. In the end, Oklahoma City bombing was not solely one of destruction and despair. It was a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who refused to let hatred and violence define their future. The Oklahoma City community, and indeed the entire nation, emerged from the tragedy with a renewed commitment to remember, rebuild, and honor the lives that were forever changed on that fateful day. And with that, we have come to the end of our video. Please don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and click that notification bell. This has been saying, see you next time.